Right. So thanks everybody for attending again. Let's see where we go this time. I thought we'd start off first of all by simply asking what people are hoping to get out of this particular session in terms of what they might like to discuss. You know, because we've pretty much concluded, at least for now, the discussion on cycles and produced some valuable content for SEBOC, but now we need to get back to I guess the original nature of the conversation. So should we start off with yourself, George?
Well, yeah, that's right. As my thinking has been evolving, it's sort of kind of crystallizing into two things that we constantly talk about: general systems theory or general theory of systems. And for me, it's kind of coming down to two basic components. One is a theory of what a system is, which I've been calling systemness. And the other is a theory of how systems come into existence and evolve. And it does seem to me that those two things taken together constitute, if applied across the entire spectrum of unbroken sequence or the grand sequence or whatever, that's really going to be pretty meaningful. So that's where I'm hoping we can focus on. I am less concerned about the sequence part of it itself, and more concerned about what phenomena give rise to a system's being at any of those levels, and then how do they interact with the world in which they find themselves.
Who would like to go next? Before I pick.
Hi, Helene.
Right. Okay, so Lynn.
Oh, thanks a lot, Gary. I mean, these are the first words I've spoken this morning. I'm kind of trying to get my brain into place, but George started pretty well. First of all, you know, discussing a GST right off the top is a big order, and I like it. And I see what George's, right away I could go off on George's two distinctions. And I don't see them so much as the same distinctions right away. So having the big conversations are really fun. I in the process of doing that, I think we'd again revisit combogenesis, ontogenesis, theory of emergence, or whatever that is, and get that kind of, you know, go through some of those. They're more similar than different, and put those together in a little bit more of a solid, you know, synthesis, I guess. Anyway, off the top of my head, that really interests me. Of course, you could mention any one of the meta pattern systems processes, any of that. Also, we could also go that, what all that means. Any one of those would work for me too. So there we go. That's me.
You think there might be some mileage? You think there might be some mileage then in again trying to come up with a common definition of that process of emergence, of coming into being?
Yeah, Len used to call it origins, which is kind of when George was talking, I thought, okay, the difference between what is systemness and what is origins of systems, you know. That's That's what I thought in my head.
Thank you.
Anyway.
Tyler, would you mind going next?
Not at all, Gary. Well, I'm really happy with all the topics that have been mentioned so far. They are things we've been kind of revolving around. I thought today I was under the assumption George was going to present something for sure. I didn't know whether Tom was going to present something or not, and I didn't know whether Len was. I'm happy kicking back and doing peer review as we discuss is what I really like to do in these meetings. And when it gets a little I find them stimulating. I do want to just say just two things really quickly before we can get to substance. I have not given up on cycles yet personally. I find myself sort of notebooking about them. I've been so stimulated by the conversation, and I guess because I wrote a whole chapter on it, revisiting my chapter and seeing things I didn't define well enough at that time, it's making me want to continue working on that, but not with this group. I think the topics that Lynn mentioned and George mentioned, I see George's separation between systems and how systems come into being. I think one's one sort of space and one is time. Lynn mentioned GST. What do these scale transcending patterns mean? Those are all topics we can continue with for sure. I do want to say the paper I sent you all in April that I submitted to the Journal of Big History on the three dynamical realms and evolutionary dynamics is a meta pattern to that in a sense defines and initiates the biological evolution and cultural evolution. So that has gotten accepted, and that will be published. They told me in 2020, although I haven't seen the final comments yet, but they said it's going to happen pretty fast at some point. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Len, would you like to go next? What would you hope to achieve through this session today?
Yes, so what this session, I just joined to learn and listen for once, although I have to emulate Tyler on saying that the topics of GST and Origins are both high on my list, so that's what I joined this group for, mostly. And mostly listen and learn. I need to learn more about listening, in fact, and so this will be an exercise for me. But both GST and Origins I also see as, like Lynn and George, I see as different topics. And so when you guys ask the question, how do the isomorphies fit into the Origins? Those are kind of like two different topics to me. One is a spin-off of the other. And I don't see that there is a direct union between those two. And perhaps we can discuss that in the future too. So mostly listening.
Thanks, Len. Tom, what are your thoughts at the moment?
As usual, I feel very much in sync with what George said, with maybe a couple of differences. I still think about the periodic table of systems of empirical basis, and it seems to me the structure, the hierarchies of system types that clearly exist now, and the order of evolution, which we've all been talking about, are both empirical basis, and it's worthwhile describing those the best way we can, which I would do through a model. So I'm interested in getting back to that. One other thought that's occurred to me, we understandably focus on system. The system always has an open system has an environment. So we call out the environment as an important part of it. But in general, the environment is just a part of a larger system that the system that we're focusing on is part of or interacts with. So it seems to me we should expand our focus. It's not on the individual system and its environment, although we have to look at that as well. It's really the whole hierarchy of systems and the order of how they got there. So it's maybe a subtle thing, but I think maybe we need to focus on a bigger piece of it than the individual system. Although we have to understand the individual systems as well.
Tom, if I might remind everybody, in my equation of systemness, the environment is an actual part of that equation. The external entities with which the system of interest is interacting are actually a part of that entire definition. So I agree with you, but it's in the book.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The problem is when you start expanding, there's no place to stop until you get to the universe.
Yeah, that's right.
Now,
That's right.
It's extremely complex. So the real issue is how do we handle this complexity to get this big picture when it's just so big and complex? So you have to start somewhere, and I think that's a big challenge for general systems theory.
Thanks, Tom. So, hi, Elaine. Welcome back.
So, did you say Len again?
No, Helene.
Oh, Helene.
Helene.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I'm just, trying to reconnect. So I'll just be the fly on the wall.
That's okay. We've had let's say we've gone off on a different track, and we've now come back. So for the last couple of sessions, we've been working on cycles. Yeah.
I've been following though. I've been following. So
yeah. So in terms of our discussions about general systems theory and the process of origins or emergence or ontogenesis or comogenesis or metacorescence, whatever we call it, maybe it's all of those things. We're coming back to that conversation again. So what we're doing at the moment is we're just polling people in terms of what are their thoughts? What is it that they'd like to explore in this conversation this time?
Yeah, I had a thought that came when I heard this distinction. I mean, between origin and system, and what came to my mind was that systems are in a permanent movement, in the sense that can you pinpoint origin as separate from the perpetual becoming of a system anytime? I mean, I don't know how to formulate that, but so that's something that I'd like to maybe make a little bit clearer, that origin is not just a point. I mean, it's a process, isn't it? And so systems are in process perpetually. So where does this distinction? I'm sure, George, I came in the middle, and I really apologize for being late. But I'm sure there are, I mean, some elements to make the distinction. But yeah, the origin thing kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Gary, can I respond to that?
Go ahead, Len.
Just very quickly, since I'm supposed to be listening, not ex cathedra statements. But I think you point out a very important distinction, Helene. The conventional sciences, almost all, will designate a time of origin and a specific origin. But I'm actually very much in agreement with your idea that systems are always becoming, always reacting to their environment. So there is a difference between our unbroken sequence of origins and, in fact, what the conventional scientists say. Although we respect their measurements, of the first appearance of a scalar level, many of them are still appearing, like stars are still appearing, even though, and the 3 generations of stars, as far as we know, are still appearing, although the first generation, it goes backwards, are the ones most often seen now. So I think your idea of always becoming is something that has to be part of the GST, but at the same time, we can relate it to the first appearance of a particular scalar level. So
yeah,
I guess
and each of your
both are true.
yeah, and each of your maximum in your sequence is a beginning and an origin for something new, isn't it? I mean, at each.
That's right. So the whole oscillation is becoming all the time.
With an origin, I mean, with new origins popping up. I mean, with,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. At least that's what I think. I don't know from studying the literature. I don't know if others agree with that. Incidentally, Tom Marzoff sent me, but I don't think he sent the rest of you, a new, what do you call it, ZML, UML model of all the cycling ideas. And I don't know if he even sent that to Gary or if it's in CBOC, but I thought that it was a very lot of work that I thank Tom Marzoff for.
Yes. You're on mute, I think, Tom. Or your mic's not working. We can't hear you. Tom, I think your mic stopped working. Tom, your mic's not working.
Tom, your mic. We can't hear you. Tom, we can't hear you.
He might not be able to hear us either.
Yeah, that's possible.
There it goes.
Oh, we could barely hear you. No.
You're reading lips, Tom. We can't hear you.
You might have to restart your mic. Oh, we heard you then.
Yeah, but barely.
Yeah, barely heard you.
So while Tom's working on that, and I'll be happy to relinquish, I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the things I've been working on, because I've been trying to, oh, you have to enable the sharing, Gary.
Yeah.
Trying to refine and better explain what I mean by ontogenesis.
Yeah. Could I just have a little say, if that's okay, George?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You didn't call on yourself.
No. Well, so a couple of things based on what Helene and Len were saying. So one of the things which sparks in my mind is the processes that bring, or the forces that bring a system together are probably the same or very similar to the forces that are still resident holding the system together. So although there may be some changes that have taken place, there might be some clues looking at systems and their binding forces in terms of what was it that actually brought the system together in the first place. So I think that's worth thinking about. And the other thing which I think is topical is the conversation we just had in the ISSS Saturday session, where we were looking at special integration groups and their role, viability, and in some cases decline within the ISSS. And something that came to mind that came across very clear is the nature, between the members, in this case the SIGs, and the overall system, which is the ISSS. And John Kinnaman was saying how important the service that the ISSS provides to the SIGs is so important for their own viability. So the ISSS provides a service to the SIGs, and if that service is not in place, then the SIGs die. But also, you know, we've seen potentially the decline of the ISSS, and this is because I think the SIGs are not providing the service that they should be providing to the ISSS. So there's that mutual relationship between the members and the whole, which is not currently effective. Yeah. So I think again that analogy, that way of thinking is important for the nature of this conversation.
Okay.
You know, and the model that we worked on, you know, some time ago with, you know, the constraints on the members, the benefits for the members, the affordances for new relationships, and the emergent properties of the whole, I think is still, you know, a useful model for exploring that landscape.
So coevolution is a major part of my concept. And I think that's what you're describing, is how does a viable system evolve if internally it's not providing, Tom said it earlier, it's really a supra system, the environment of a system of interest, one that we might be working on, is actually embedded in a supra system. And it's all the other subsystems in that supra system that are part of the environment of the one that we're focusing on. Right. So I think that, for me anyway, that is a natural part of this whole kind of thing.
So over to you then, George.
All right. Let's see. Where is it? Let's see. First of all, that. Oop. Okay. This is somewhat review, but to some extent, I don't know how much people actually kind of remember some of the details that I got into before. This is going to partially relate to Len's concepts of system processes, but only, I say only partially. And I'll hopefully be able to explain that. I've got to figure out this view.
I've got a presentation on full screen at the moment. It's good for
yeah, I'm trying to get the picture of you guys out of the way.
You can click on it and move it.
Yeah, I did that, but okay, I'll just move it as far as I can to the right.
You can collapse it if you hit the little dash.
Ah. Okay.
No?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that worked. That worked. Great. Thanks.
Okay.
I learned something new today. Okay. So what drew me to Len initially was in the Berlin conference. I went to a workshop in which one of the background readings we had was his paper on system process theory. And I had been arguing for a couple of years, for example, with the folks at Portland State, that we needed a new way to talk about systems that was process oriented, that involved processes. All my experience in both the working world and the scientific world up to that time had convinced me that the core of everything that we saw was in some way or shape or form a process. But by process, I mean something fairly specific, where Len has sort of given a list of all of the things that are phenomena that we can witness. They are clearly processes, or at least part of processes. And we've gone through the cycle thing where I've actually asked the question, is this maybe not an epiphenomena as opposed to a primary phenomena? And that the existence of a cycle may in part be because we have closure in one sense, or in the case of a spiral, we have a growing kind of closure, if you will. Anyway, I really look at the world in terms of transformations. And I call these work processes because material are getting transformed in some sense. Energy can be transformed, and certainly messages can be transformed. We call that normally information processing. And I've identified, using this kind of graphic, these fundamental, or what I would call atomic work processes, where they always involve the same sorts of things. There's a material, in this case, a material input and a lower entropy product output, and then some high entropy waste coming in. It always takes energy flow through the process and out as waste heat. And if we look at all of these, they have exactly the same sorts of look at them. That is, there's an input, something happens in here, and then there's an output. And that transformation is what we're most concerned with. What I did was, and I don't claim this is an exhaustive list, just like with Len's list of isomorphies, this is just the ones that I could identify in the systems that I had been working with. So there are several, what I call atomic processes, where we get, say, for example, I'm calling them substances here. So they could be material or other kinds of energy and so forth, but some sort of a combining operation that produces this lower entropy product. Or it could be a splitting operation that produces two outputs that are of higher quality, and like digestion, for example. And then impeding and buffering, and then several more that are fairly specific: copying, propelling, sensing, amplifying, inverting, and modulating. And what I've done is actually try to demonstrate how these sort of atomic processes, and when I say atomic, I mean that you can't get any more fundamental. Quarks are not in my sense, and as far as we know, not themselves processes, but everything from a nucleon on up are definitely kinds of processes. So basically what I'm saying is that systemness comes from the organization of these processes. And here I give an example. I call this composing processes. So here's an example of several of the ones that I showed before: modulation, inversion, combining, and what I call sensing, which is transduction. Notice that all of them have some form of energy input and a waste heat output and so on. But what this thing is basically doing is taking in this case, a modulated energy flow, which actually is coming from think of this as like a set point of a thermometer, a thermostat, excuse me. And then one that is actually sensing a physical force that is related to whatever it is we want that set point to be. And by combining these things in the right sequence and so forth, we end up with something that's of value, in this case, an error message. And that error message then can form feedback to an actuator system, which I'm sort of working on now to have a similar feel to this. An actuator system which provides us with the notion of something like homeostasis. So anyway, that is that's where I'm trying to go with this, is to demonstrate how these, what I call fundamental atomic processes, can be composed to get other processes. And let's see. Yeah. And so basically what all of these are going to be used to demonstrate is how we construct that equation of systemness from the variables that are involved in all of these things. And I won't get into that. Yeah, this would take me too long to explain. So all I wanted really to cover now is to sort of show that starting with what I've been calling a process, you can compose these things to get more complex processes. And from those more complex processes, that process of auto-organization, selection, emergence and selection is what gives us the higher orders of systems. So.
And I would like to ask a question.
Yeah.
I have one. I'd like to kick off. So within that combination of the atomic processes, I'm guessing that in every one of the, I'm just guessing that in each of the domains that, for instance, Tyler has been talking about, all three of these atomic processes may be playing a part. So the information processing is not just restricted to the domain of social. The information processing is also taking place at the molecular level, for instance.
Yeah, these are across all of those domains.
Yeah. And are they do you consider them to be general to all system types?
From the work that I've done in biology, sociology, organization, governance, physics, chemistry, you name it. Yes, you'll find all of those involved in some way or another.
Right. Yeah. So even at the hadron level, from hadrons to
yes.
all the way up, just above quarks.
Now, one thing I will point out about that, Tyler actually asked me about this quite some time ago. On that energy flow thing, it's showing the energy flow at the time, let's say, of formation. So at the hadron level, Tyler talks about energy repose, that once the energy involved in the formation is no longer available, shall we say, but the system itself remains. And so the principle is still the same. It's just that it's time and environment specific. So as the universe is cooling in its early phase, it reached a stage at which it froze the particles that were actually created. And we don't need to talk anymore about energy flow through those particles. That's what I was getting at about phase transition. That's why I think we should look at that as well.
Hello?
Yeah, I had a question about the three types of work processes. I understand material, energy, and message. Is there, well, maybe I missed in your schemas and the following slides, but is there a pattern in which they work together?
Yes, that was the
in a reproducible
yes
way, because it was very detailed, the next slide, so
right,
I didn't
right.
quite catch how the three packages
Well, the point of those three was to show that there are transformations occurring that apply to those three aspects. So there are material transformations that will involve energy, but it's not, I'm not talking about an energy transformation per se. Then there are energy transformations that can be, and the whole point of this work process is the output is lower entropy than the inputs, right? The product output is, so to speak, more valuable, more usable. But I was just trying to show that there are three different transformation processes that we can talk about. And then we look at the details of the kinds of transformations that we're talking about. So combining, taking two materials and getting them to come together to produce a lower entropy output product, right? So you can see this in chemistry just real easily in atomic combinations and so forth. And as you go up the scale, you know, you can see the same kind of thing occurring over and over and over again, but at different scales. And then the third thing I was trying to show there was how you can compose. And the scale here is immaterial, because the same phenomena will emerge. In the case I was showing, it's producing an error message. The same phenomena will occur using those fundamental concepts of work processes. Does that help?
I'm not sure but maybe I didn't formulate my question clearly, or maybe it's not clear in my mind, that that I was wondering if there was some kind of a way where you can describe the pattern of how energy, matter, and information at a more not detailed level played out. I'm basically trying to see if there are some isomorphies there, that message and energy and matter transform each other in a certain way. And I mean, I have something in mind, and Tom will probably see where I'm trying to get to, or where I come from, is about the semiotic or biosemiosis or semiotic process that actually puts the sign and the transformation of the message within the process of the transformation of the whole thing. I mean, it kind of weaves the whole thing together. It's not very clear in my, I'm sorry.
Well,
but
so let's take the material combination process. We're taking two relatively higher entropy materials, and the transformation is that they're going to be combined. Now, remember, this is at an extremely abstract level of discussion. I'm not talking about manufacturing per se, but manufacturing fits in that. I'm not talking about you know, atomic chemical combinations, but it fits within that. So this is very abstract. So we take two high entropy inputs. They're combined, whatever the actual internal mechanism is of combining, and out comes a material that is of much lower entropy. And what this means is it's more useful, and that gives us a sense of useful to what or to whom. And it's the recognition, when you want to talk about signs, it's that difference in entropy that actually constitutes a message, if you will, to the to whatever's going to receive that, saying, ah, this is of use to me, right? So I can use this lower entropy material, whereas I couldn't use these other two.
Yeah, that's the type of stuff that I'm looking at, is that what becomes a message for what, and how do these different things combine together? I mean, yeah, okay.
You know, Helene, I know exactly what you're talking about, I think. This is where I've been reading a lot about information and different points of view on what information is. And George has really, really influenced my view of what that is. And we're sitting here and going, and I look at message transformations. And I go, okay, what are messages? And they're actual, just simply change, environmental change, whatever that may be, that a system will, that will be input. You know, when people say information is physical, I think what they're, information itself, making the just information, first of all, is the forming within now. I like that. It's the actual forming. The messages are what cause that forming, or what, enhance that forming within. But messages are simply changes. And so when I read Shannon, he's talking about communication through lines, I mean, he's talking about an engineer's point of view. And when we go to a systemic point of view, so when I see George's distinctions between between material energy and message transformations, I have to look at the chart again. I have to look at the pages again, and I have to really grok it. You know what I mean, George? I got to see more than just those slides. I've got to look at the slides again and again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And in fact, can you share your slides, or?
Again?
No, I mean, generally pass them out to us, email them.
Oh, yeah, I can. I'm working on that PowerPoint as a webinar.
Oh, okay.
But I can send you chunks of it if you like. It's also in the new book.
Oh, okay.
I believe you have a
I'll
link.
get it out of there. Yeah, I've been looking at it. Yeah.
Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 sort of form the essence.
It's just that I have to slug through Chapter 2 and 3, and if I had them just right there, I wouldn't have to do that.
Maybe the answer to my question is in the auto-organization slides, or the 2 slides that you had after that. Because I guess you're talking about feedback, and I guess that the output of one thing becomes the message for the other, for another process. So probably the response is there, but you didn't show them. So
no, I was trying to basically focus in on how my concept of what a process is. Okay. And what my dictionary of processes looks like could be used to get these higher order capabilities. And getting back to something that Gary said earlier, what keeps those things together is the final output, that error message, has worth to whatever the actuator controller is in keeping the system stable. So that combination is, it's what am I trying to say? It's helping itself, if you will. It's beneficial to the whole, which means that it's receiving the benefit of being kept together. And if it wasn't so, then either entropy, decay, or something coming along and bombarding it would break it apart and it'd be gone. But somehow or another, it emerged as something that was of worth to a larger system. if that makes sense. Hi, Tom. You got
Can you hear me now?
just barely.
Wow.
You need a new microphone. No, you've gone completely.
If you put it in the chat box, Tom,
Yeah, as a last resort, put something in the chat.
Would you have some headphones or something, or some, you know, would you have something like that that could help put the sound in the system a little bit more, a little bit more directly? Or reboot maybe, because it worked in the beginning.
So we're not getting the message.
Yeah, I wanted to hear you, Tom.
say one real quick thing while Tom's puzzling this out. So
Closing
Lynn,
your PC and starting it up again, Tom. We'll let you back in.
Okay.
Oh, we heard you then, barely again. Yeah, try restarting, see if that helps. Go ahead, George.
just making a distinction in terms of message, the way I've been using it, message versus information. So a message can convey information to the receiver, which I think you now fully grasp that aspect. But many, many different things can be messages. And I specify that a message is a modulated signal, modulated by the sender. And that modulation may or may not end up being informational to the receiver. One of the examples I give, and communications engineers just got really off track here because they keep talking about the source entropy or the information encoded into the message. What's really going on is when you send a message, you assume you're saying something to the recipient that will inform them. But that's not necessarily the case. And this is one of the reasons why in a broadcast system, for example, you can send out the same message to many different recipients and they can all receive and interpret differently different amounts of information. It's not given by the sender, it's received by the receiver. And so the notion of message here is the same as modulated signal. In the example I gave of the material combination and the product output being perceived, so to speak, we're going to use that term, by the receiver of that material, is that it's of worth, that is actually containing information if initially if a receiver sees that as being of worth and then changes somehow to accept that as being sort of an ongoing flow, if you will. So material flow and energy flow, well, energy flow, of course. Messages I kind of restrict to the intentionally modulated kinds of signals.
Well, would that be a general systems thing though? That sounds kind of limited to things that do that. You know what I mean? Things that actually modulate messages. I'm thinking of, I was just writing again about climate as a network and these guys who almost 20 years ago now, 15 years ago, mapped out a worldwide grid of atmospheric pressure readings and then they had each point on the grid had of the entire globe had 660 readings over 12 years or something, and they were able to show how the worldwide climate fluctuated every 5 by 5 degrees throughout the world. And they referred to these fluctuations as information. They referred to they showed how in the tropics the nodes were all pretty much the same number of links. You know, they showed they had the same. Gosh, my brain! I've got to say what the name of that is. And they showed that in the northern and the southern hemispheres that they were more. They followed more power laws. The numbers of links for each of the nodes, and that the tropical area modulates the entire world's climate and stabilizes it. And they referred to all of that change, all of those fluctuations as information traveling through the entire climate system.
Well, the role of being an observer and seeing change in the world, you are receiving information if it changes, you know, the way you think. So that's, in my opinion, an appropriate use of the term.
But they're not saying, they're saying it's the information is the climate information, not our information.
No. There's no, it's the change in the climate that they're observing.
Yes.
As observers, they're being informed of what's going on in the climate.
No, they're talking about the climate being informed.
Well, other cells may very well be receiving that same, so it's a material message, right? Or
right.
not a
No,
message, but a material.
I understand what you're saying. They're referring to the climate itself, the climate as a big information
generator.
Generator. And I guess it would be change, or you could call it messages, are being sent constantly between across, from, through the entire system. Now, you can't say it's a node to a node to a node the way you can in a regular, like network simulation. They've got to make up the nodes. You know what I mean? They've got to determine.
It's an abstraction.
Exactly.
It's an abstraction.
But in that respect, are those messages being sent among the nodes? No, but that's changing fluctuations. It's the changing. It's the fluctuations of the structures, the material transformation, the energy changes, definitely. Is it message transformations? See, that's where I go, okay, this is where I get. When we make the distinction between material, energy, and message, the changing of material and the changing of energy, which, by the way, somewhere get the same there, but are all the messages. The change is what gets interpreted by the system as a message.
So this book that
distinctions is a little, I have to look
book
at
that several of us are reading by Hidalgo. I've sort of said that I'm not real thrilled with his way of using the term information. He says about how information grows. And it is this constant fluctuation of things in the world that are informing other things in the world. Systems making changes inform other systems. Now, whether that's intentional in the sense that the system that changed is coding messages to be sent to the system that needs to know about it. So we don't talk that way.
Right.
Because they're not, that's not a communications problem. And what I started out by saying is communications engineers have got this funny aspect of talking about source entropy. In a sense, it is kind of the same, because the amount of change that can occur in, say, system A is based on the number of states that that system can be in. And the state that system B is in is is basically based on the last state observed from system A. And when system A changes to a new state, that propagates by whatever means, by material or energy means, or messages to system B, which then has to make changes with respect to its anticipation of what system A is. So there's no so observed information versus transmitted information. There's no real difference in the fact that it's the receiving system that is, if you will, learning something new.
The tree falls in the wood.
Yeah.
The tree falls in the woods is the classic thing. And of course, if the tree falls in the woods and you're that little mycelia underneath the tree, you're affected. You know, I mean, that's definite information. Or if you're a squirrel and you live in the tree, it's definite information. I mean, and if I'm not standing in the forest and I don't hear it, you know, I mean, it's the same. I can't believe, as I'm writing what I'm writing, how many homilies and I mean apply.
Yeah.
With everything. I mean,
the crux of it for me was what's his name? Margaret Mead's former husband.
Basin.
A difference that makes a difference. So it's a difference in the source that makes a difference in the receiver.
Well, and couldn't you say that it's the form of the change in a system that becomes or not an information for another system to process rather than be received? It's like you're processing the form of a change, or this difference that makes a difference, which is the form of the change, as a message that triggers something else.
Yeah, well, so that's where I differentiate between information and knowledge. And that's why I'm sort of not loving Hidalgo's approach to things.
Len?
Yeah, Len, you wanted to say?
You're
muted.
Mute.
Unmute, Len, unmute yourself.
Oh, I thought I was unmuted, sorry. In my courses on genetics since the 1970s, I used this definition for genetic information. Of course, as a general systems person, I gave a general systems definition, and I wonder if it is any help to this discussion. It's in genetic information and in all other cases of information, it's non-random sequence of parts transferred to another system according to a language known to both sender and receiver. So what this definition says is that you can broadcast a message, but in fact, in class, I used to do a gobbledygook of sounds, guttural sounds, and said, what was the information transferred? And of course, no information was transferred. And then I said a phrase in French, and I said, information was transferred, but if you don't know French, you didn't get it, and so on. So
Did you-
that's kind of a general definition of information. The
Could you
non-random
paste it?
sequence of
Could
parts.
you paste it on the chat, because it's, if you have it written somewhere on your computer, can you copy and paste it on the chat so we can?
I could.
Oh, I'm
but,
sorry, I'm not a.
It's
I'm
been in
not
my genetics
Okay, so a non-random.
PowerPoints for a long time.
I can't write very fast, so it's a non-random.
I'll put it in quotes. The remember, I'm supposed to be just listening. The non-random.
Well, listen while you type.
Okay.
Or get it. Tyler, we haven't heard from you yet.
Oh, George, okay. A cool project. Could I ask you some questions?
Absolutely.
A cool. No. So could you put up the slides again? A cool project, though, to aim at these atomic processes. Okay, I'm with you on that.
These, whoa, these.
Yeah, your first one, yeah. So we're talking, just to be clear, we're talking about matter, energy, and messages. Are you? But now this slide of combining, splitting, impeding, buffering, copying, can all these apply to the three matter, energy, and messages?
Yeah, yes. So here, I get my thing. So here it says other substances.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a gray as opposed. So that could be material, two materials, and a material output, or it could be two kinds of energy, combining those, and it'll be an energy output.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be two kinds of messages, in which case this is, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so presumably one could have a matrix then of the matter, energy, and messages, horizontal and vertical, these 10 atomic processes. And you could give examples of them. So now impeding, I think, is obvious. Is impeding the opposite of accelerating, of amplifying, I mean?
Yeah, propelling, yeah.
Propelling.
Right.
Copying, okay. Sensing, okay. Inverting, could you just tell us what that is?
Yeah, basically what could be as simple as a digital input that gets, bit flipped. That's probably the simplest example, but it can also work mathematically if you've got a continuous process or continuous input rather, say a sine wave that's converted into a, what's the opposite of sine?
Cosine.
Cosine. Jeepers.
Yeah.
Doesn't take long for that stuff to So there are all kinds of specific mechanisms that you can invoke to actually take a message that's a modulated input.
Yes, does that apply mostly to messages though? That would not be material generally?
I don't see how it could be material.
Yeah.
Inversion, I mean, what would be the sense in which material is inverted?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of it either. And modulating, is that again applying to only some of the energy, matter, messages? Is that more messages modulating?
No, this is all three. And what it's trying to show is we do have to have a modulated energy flow that will take. Now, actually, an amplifier is an example of, well, it's a sort of a reverse example. Actually, you get a modulated message input and energy flow input, and an unmodulated but a high potential input. The major distinction here being that these two things are inverted as compared to the roles of these two things. And so amplifying is taking this high potential energy flow and modulating it so that you get a modulated high power output.
And modulating is putting some kind of pattern on it
Right.
that did not exist.
Exactly, exactly.
And then
I talk about pattern substance and so forth.
what would be the example on a cell, on a bacterium, or are not all these examples apply to all levels?
Yeah, well, let's go down. Where do I have it? It's kind of far down here, I think. Oh shoot! Let me escape from this. Why can't I escape from this? Oh, there we go. Ah, rats. Let me see if I can find it, and then I'll share it. But the ribosome. I actually demonstrate, and mitochondria and things like that. I demonstrate how they actually fit this kind of pattern.
So, well, the ribosomes is sitting there as a combination of enzymes and RNA. It's a protein RNA thing. The transfer RNAs are bringing, Len, correct me if I don't get this totally right, just jump in, are bringing amino acids in. Is the messenger RNA also sitting there too with the pattern that the amino acids are going to be put on in a certain sequence? So that's definitely combining.
Well, that's what
I
can't find the ribosome.
But
it's not in these slides.
But I guess I'm asking to some extent, trying to probe a little bit to see, are all these processes truly atomic and that they are unique, versus in some cases the ribosome assembling the amino acids into a protein is a combining function of matter. Of course, you get the release of water, right? Because you get these peptide bonds forming. So I'm just, I guess some of the terms, modulating and amplifying, some of them I see that are applying in the computer realm very easily, or electronic realm very easily, or maybe even the human communication systems. But and I'm not even going into the nucleon, or I do agree with you that some of the physics systems are the energy change happens in the formation, not in the ongoing life of those things. So I'm with you with regard to the your aim here, that of your idea that there are atomic processes. I'm totally with you on that. I guess I would need to see multiple examples of each one.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the chore in front of me. It's sort of like Len. He's got a list of candidate isomorphies, and he has to go through a set of criteria to accept or reject, or whatever the case might be. And I have sort of the same kind of problem in front of me. These are the ones that I have picked out because in my experience, I've seen these over and over again at various levels. But you're right, it's going to take a really exhaustive list of examples of these operating at the different levels of the sequence.
Go ahead, Len.
Len.
Can I break in here? I have two comments, even though I'm only listening.
We don't believe you anymore.
You knew that I couldn't keep a promise, right?
You
are listening more. You are listening more, so that's good enough.
That's good. I shut up somewhat. Tyler, besides the ribosome, there are a very complicated set of enzymes that work with the ribosome in order to get the translation. And the same thing goes for replication. It's very, very complicated in the modern cell. So the transfer doesn't occur simply because there's a correspondence between the sequence in the messenger RNA and in the translated product. In fact, there's several processes involved where most of the messages aren't consistent. They have blocks of stuff that's nonsense in between that have to be put together. So the entire set of processes before you get a messenger RNA product. And then the messenger RNA products are variant too. So you end up with a whole series of enzymes or proteins that are isozymes to each other. They're isomers to each other, I should say. So Tyler, I just wanted to say that there's a lot between DNA makes RNA makes protein, which we basically learned in the basic course. But then when you get into the specifics, the molecular biology is really advanced in detail since then. The other thing I would like to comment on is I see the atomic processes that George has just outlined as a more general case of the isomorphies that I'm talking about, much like John Kinneman's series of relational Aristotelian causes are a more general case of the isomorphies. So actually I would parallel his atomic processes to my identifying functions. And I agree with George that what we're both doing is a research program, not a product. It's not a finished product. It's a research program for maybe a century of hundreds of people working, if we can only attract them to working on it.
Right.
And the same thing goes for my work too. End of comment. So
Yeah.
identifying functions.
Yep. The thing I was talking about, the ribosome, Tyler, is similar to what I showed as the composition for a error detection circuit, if you will. You have to compose a number of these atomic processes in order to get the overall overarching of more complex kinds of systems.
And George, would you also claim that these processes would be true at a number of levels within a cell, and then in the multicellular organism, and then in the animal society, and then in human societies, that they would be operating at all these scales?
Yeah, and Len brings up a really good point. We're talking about functions that recur at all these scales, but they combine in new and better ways to make those scales. So when I talk about atomic, actually that came from when I was developing the algorithm for functional structural decomposition in chapter 5, that you have to, it's a recursive algorithm. And with recursion, you have to have a stopping condition. You have to be able to say, okay, I don't need to go any further in this decomposition. I certainly don't need to go down to the atomic level to find what's going on. And what occurred to me is, well, there are these relative, at some low level, I call them the leaves on a tree, a decomposition tree. At some very low level, that function is so well known and understood that you don't have to keep going. You can stop there and go off and do something else. So that was the origin of them. And then as I got to thinking more and more about ontogenesis, it occurred to me that yes, what I'm really talking about is a process in auto-organization where these things first sort of line up, get together, and then if the function that they're collectively performing is of value or is stable in that environment, then they'll survive, persist. And then the question is, well, what about reproduction or things like that. Once we get into the area of life, then we have to be talking about that. So I had that copying function was one of the atomic things where you take an unmodulated source flow and a modulated source flow and imprint the modulation of that one source onto the unmodulated. So now you get two modulated copies of it coming out. And that would take into account things like the production of messenger RNA from DNA and things of that nature.
Can you hear me by any chance?
We can now.
Oh, good.
It's a bit better.
Wow. From way back in the beginning of George's, I like the integration of information, material, and energy, particularly energy. And given that the universe is expanding and cooling, it seems like thermodynamics is one of the most fundamental properties of it. And I think it has to be brought in. So I like the way it's put together. Of course, it reminds me of Odin. And also, it seems to be a functional breakdown. We've already talked about that. And it brings to mind the idea that I've had, but have not done any work on, of I think I call it a property or a functional hierarchy, where at the simpler types of systems provide simple functions, and then they get combined, as we've just been talking about in the last couple minutes. They get combined into more sophisticated ones. So along with the hierarchy of system types, there's a hierarchy of functions that they provide. And that could also be modeled in conjunction with the other relationships that we have. And I've never seen anything quite like that. I don't know if anyone has attempted that or not.
Okay, good. Helene, you had your hand up.
I don't think I did. Maybe I.
Oh, you were just.
Maybe I was just.
Being French or something.
Something like that.
Something that I'm struggling with a bit, George, is the distinction you make between material and energy. You do make that distinction, don't you? You see, I see material as both mass and energy. So how are you making that distinction between material and energy? Where do you draw the boundary?
Well, so we talked about this in the past, that, and this is just pure physics. The idea that momentum is conserved unless interacted by some force, and generally that comes in the form of an energy flow of some kind. And I distinguish between the energy that's going to get used up in doing work. That's why I always have those little wavy red lines coming out, because that's waste heat. That's the second law at work. But material doesn't convey energy. It may, through momentum, may convey a force, but that had to be imparted somehow, somewhere in the larger system, so to speak. Now, if you're thinking of the interconversion between mass and energy, that's one thing, but that's not normally what we see at work. The only place you see that occurring is in the core of stars and so forth, and supernova. So I do make that distinction. In the end, it's the material, and particularly what I've been characterizing as lower entropy material, meaning it's configured in some way that makes it useful to a downstream recipient. when we get into very complex, like the complex adaptive and evolvable systems I've been talking about in ISSS, you're consuming internally, or a cell. A cell consumes much of its own product. And even cells that are in a multicellular organism in tissues that are producing, material output that is going to be used by other cells somewhere else in the body, that would be considered a lower entropy material output or a product.
See, I think you're equating material with a product. Is that right?
No, material is just material. And the usability of the material, the affordances of a material depend upon the amount of work that's been done on some raw material, like just taking in a bunch of nutrients, and then through the magic of metabolism, we're getting the energy to drive things like the protein production, fat production, and so on and so forth.
So how do you convey energy without material?
Well, there's lots of different ways. Now, I mean, let's take electricity, for example. Yes, you have material involved, but only in terms of being a conduit. One of Tyler's tubes, for example. But the stuff that really matters is what's going through the tube, not the tube itself.
Yeah.
Tube is important.
But there's still a flow of electrons. The electron is the carrier.
Yeah.
That's what I'm struggling with. I can't think of an example.
Well, what about photons coming down onto a tree?
Well, there's no tube involved there.
And it's there's no matter. I mean,
there is.
Yes,
well,
there is.
the photon, you mean?
Yeah, the photon has mass.
No, the photon has no mass.
When it arrives, it has mass.
What about neutrinos? Let's start there.
Now they have mass too. Yeah, well, yes, they now do have mass. And
I know.
They don't have. I don't think they don't have it precisely defined, but they have it kind of limited.
Actually, I was going to tell you about this. A new book I just read on dark energy and dark matter, and it goes into all those kinds of things. So I'll send you the link.
But Gary, this is a little bit of a side, but I don't think photon has mass, but it does have. Well, it can be affected by gravity, right? That's the thing. Anyway, we can look this up.
It's why many authors will say matter/energy, matter-energy.
Yeah.
And when they're writing. I know that James Miller did in Living Systems Theory way back in his 1969 book. Or 1972.
E equals mc squares. You can't get away from it.
Yeah.
Okay. There is a mass equivalent. Yes.
In a few beautiful pages. Yes. He does it quite beautifully, and I'll have to relook that up.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I'm sorry. We can go back to Miller, but I know I'm just thinking. I was just reading about this because that's the photon is not affected by the Higgs field, which only things that are affected by the Higgs field have mass, and the photon is not. I believe the gluon is not, but strangely, some of the bosons are. I think the W has mass. I said, what the hell's going on there in these little stupid particles? Like if all the fermions have mass but all the bosons don't, I can kind of get it. Not that I understand it, but okay, that makes some sense. But now some of the bosons don't have mass, they don't feel the Higgs field, and some do. Explain that, you physicists writing these books for the general public.
Tyler, I have to break in here, even though I'm just listening, because Hillary isn't here, and he blew a hole in, and you did too, in my spin hypothesis. And I want to say explicitly that we may have to, or general systems may actually reform physics to a great degree. We don't have to necessarily follow everything they've said before, because quantum physics and the modern physics particle theory are not agreed. And I think we're closer to doing quantum physics and doing the bridge between the two. And they have a lot to learn from us. That's all I'm.
Nice, nice, Lynn.
Back to hearing mode, listening mode.
Since we have Helen here, our biosemiotician expert, am I saying that right? And we got into this thing about messages, and Lynn was saying some of the climate people are, as I texted in, is what I heard Lynn saying, is some of them are saying effects of cells in the climate zone are information. But then George was clearly saying, no, he didn't see that. He saw this information for the scientists. They watch the interactions and get information from it. And Helen's is into this cascading, not cascading, in multiple scales of information and messages. And I don't know how I haven't really come down on the side of this yet, because I was thinking if we get into the humans, no problem. Okay. There's humans, no problem. People have intents. It may not be received. If you're not speaking the same language, there's a message given, but it may not be heard. There's unintended messages through your face. Like, okay, there's all kinds of things within the human realm. We get into the biological with the biosemiotics. That's where I don't see things defined well enough for me. And I'd like to maybe have a bit of discussion on it, since that may relate to George's message part as well. So a tree, I mean, they're now saying trees, if a tree is being eaten by an insect, sometimes it can give off a chemical into the air that affects some of the species, and maybe some of the, not only the same species, let's just say same species for now, because that's been proven, I think, pretty well. And those other trees start manufacturing their insect repelling molecules, even though they have not been attacked by the insect themselves. So that's, you could say that that's a signal from one tree to the other. I don't know if, but then light coming down, let's say photons coming onto a tree, the tree is growing up towards the light. Some people would say, well, see, that's not the same kind of signal. That's more George's energy, where the tree is taking advantage of the energy to grow and get more energy. But at the same time, the tree is a responsive, it is a living thing. And so to me, I have to say, I'm very messed up with what's called what. Because a hard-nosed evolutionary biologist, I don't know if Richard Dawkins would say this, but it's like somebody would say, well, that chemical signal from one tree to the next, because the tree is being eaten, the tree doesn't know it's signaling its other partners of the same species by putting out a volatile gas into the air that is sensed, so the other trees put out the insect repelling molecules in their body, not into the air, in their body. So that it's merely a evolved response that nobody knows anything there. Nobody know in the human sense. Well, obviously it's not knowing in the human sense, but this stuff gets really fuzzy, I think, when in terms of the evolutionary explanations of what's going on. Yeah.
What I'm working on right now, and I still don't have the words and the kind of put everything together, but I'm trying to bring together the theories of Maturana and Varela about the structural coupling and the structural drift, and how things in the biological world, but I'm pretty sure that you can kind of go beyond in pre-biological, co-evolved. And this ties also to lens cycles and sequences of evolution. So, so I'm trying to bring this together with the biosemiotic and the semiosis processes, where actually, and I think the two are saying similar things, that any organism actually has operates because it functions, because it reacts or it acts on a signal or on something that it kind of triggers its next move or change. So anything can be a signal, whether it's a material signal like your gas emitted by the tree, or the pheromones emitted by the ants, but it can also be the making out by the tree, where is the light, you know, like I'm seeking light. So what are the sensors of the tree that kind of get the tree to actually process that there's light, and that to act towards the light?
So
Or
you're not dividing those into separate sets of
I'm not,
phenomena.
no.
Right now anyway.
No, not right now. And what I'm trying to do is to try and kind of bring together the coupling and the kind of co-evolution from, on the basis of Maturana's thinking and theory, because I think it's very potent to it's very abstract, but it's very potent to show the kind of dynamics of it independently of any material or I mean, I don't have the words to yeah, just a sec, Len, and this signaling thing. And I was about to ask you, Len, because what you have studied and how you consider Maturana's theories about the structural coupling and the co-evolution and the structural drift, etc., in relation to your work, because I'm not sure I have seen anything about it. So you'll go, because I've been reading stuff and it came lots of questions I had to you about it. So if you have something to say.
So I'm allowed to talk because even though I'm listening, because she asked me a direct question, right? First, I want to urge all of you to see the PBS special on slime molds. I grew Physarum in the laboratory to study the nuclei on semi-defined media, not the junk oats that they used, for about 30 years. And I just stopped growing. I was about to start it again, but they were going to arrest me for using stuff from material from the stockroom. Anyway, so nonsense. But in any case, in that, it adds to Tyler Vogt's example about the insects and the trees, because it says in there, and I don't associate myself with all of their saying that protoplasm already can do brain functions and learning. I think that's nonsense. I think they've extended in their experiments, they've projected their own cells on the results, okay? But look at that slime mold thing, and it says there that slime molds that have learned a matrix or to solve a matrix to get to a food source actually can learn from each other. So descendant slime molds actually know better and quicker how to solve the matrix to get to the food source. So that's kind of like what you were saying, Tyler.
Mm-hmm.
And on that, I would like to say that we may just be missing the thing that's transferred that George Mobus is talking about. It may be molecular and we just don't understand how those molecules endogenize a reaction to something. We just don't know, okay? And it may be discovered in the future. In direct answer to Elaine Finadori on Maturana and Varela, I've got to tell you that I think Maturana and Varela are frauds. I think they've always been frauds and have taken over the systems community on a fraudulent basis. What they did is took and actually made autopoiesis out of autocatalysis. It was very well known in the biological realm, and they just applied it as a general systems principle, which is okay, incidentally, and I shouldn't call them frauds, but since I have such a bad impression of them, I don't like references to Maturana and Varela. And I'm sorry, Helene, that's just my judgment. And I'm sticking to it, okay?
No,
go ahead and answer that.
No, but I'm not saying that their theory of autopoiesis is a super novelty in the systems theory thing. I'm just saying that and I'm not even talking about autopoiesis actually as a thing to prove life or whatever. I'm just talking about the way they framed the co-evolution and the learning of the system in operational closure. So maybe other general systems theorists have framed it in a similar way, but to date, it's the explanation that I find the most interesting to give a context into which the biosemiotic processes can be better explained and result into some interesting things in terms of systems evolution. So that's it. But
Elena, you can't go wrong citing Maturana and Varela because they have a very strong following in the ISSS, and you can't hurt yourself by doing that at all. And remember, I said that even though I think they're fraudulent, I think that autopoiesis and things like that, self-organization, as George Mobus uses it, are very important processes and systems. So you can't go wrong.
Yeah, I did see you quote them though in a couple of papers. So
no, I didn't ever quote them. I don't think. If I did, send them to me and I'll erase.
I don't know, but I've been reading some interesting stuff and wanted to know what you thought about it. Anyway, sure. I'll submit to you what I will come up with in due time.
If it focuses on the process, it's you know, it's going to be good, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Tyler.
Just to follow up on the Maturana and Varela conversation, although I do want to get back to the messages a bit. I once went to a cybernetics meeting, was fresh after my PhD, and Maturana was there. And I have to say, I was really impressed with the guy. He was able, whatever language he developed internally to himself, it gave him the ability to ask people pretty detailed questions. So I was pretty impressed with him just as an intellectual. And then when I was hanging out at the Lindisfarne Association in New York City in my mid-20s and upper 20s, actually upper 20s, and I did a semester with Gregory Bateson because he was the scholar in residence there. The next year after that, Varela was the scholar in residence. So I had this sort of, what they had to do to get housing and food for a year and be part of New York City is to give a class, and I was in Varela's class, and he was, I have to say, he was really impressive too. But then as the years went on, I do agree with Len that the word autopoiesis, and one thing against is when I try to teach it to students, they really can't pronounce it, they can't remember it. It's it's a very awkward word. Lynn Margulis was really into the word, and I'm perfectly comfortable, but I guess there was some debate. There's this famous Austrian or German guy named Nicholas Luhmann, and a friend of mine got me into him, but he's developing ideas of society as an autopoietic system, you know, where people are talking with each other, and that's how society's replicating. I reference him in my Quarks to Culture because he clearly is into culture being an evolutionary process with sort of sub-processes in it. However, this friend of mine, Bruno Clark, said he knows that Maturana and Varela didn't like Luhmann because they did not think their theory should be applied to social systems. That was a biological term. So just a little sense that there's all these infighting just going on with the term autopoiesis. Basically, I do agree with Len that autocatalysis or even self-organization, there's strong overlaps there. And I don't know if, and maybe Maturana and Varela, just that they were doing this in the 70s. So some of the self-organization language was just starting, and so they were part of the group seeing it in their own way, and they named it, like, I guess, Len's, concrescence and metaconcrescence, and my combogenesis, or so, we're sort of seeing something at the same time. But my question is to get back to this message thing. Since George honored us with presenting this work that we can talk about and review, I'm wondering, George, if you have any responses to the discussion about a tree growing to the light versus slime molds sending out signals to each other that can make the slime molds come together, versus trees influencing chemicals that they're putting out to each other. Because it's all, in a sense, we know life forms respond to environmental conditions, but what does this mean in terms of the use of the words energy, matter, information, messages, which we're trying to get down to some basics here.
So in the case of trees, I think it's fairly well accepted that trees are, most woody plants automatically grow up and will only deviate. Oh, I've got this fantastic picture of a tree that looks like it's growing around something, a big, huge tree. I ought to dig that up somewhere. But in any case, they're programmed to grow upward unless something's obstructing their growth pattern. But what they do, at least the deciduous trees will do, is they were responding to the modulation of seasons. That is to say, they are sensitive to and they change their behavior with respect to what the photoperiodicity is doing. And that's true of many plants. They're not just temperature sensitive, they're responding to the changes in the light pattern. Non-woody plants, on the other hand, are known to, if you've ever watched a sunflower, this is a really good example. They basically track the sun across the sky. Well, the sun is changing position. So it's a change, a difference that makes a difference in the way that sunflower. Same thing is true of the chemicals that are being put out by plants that are being chomped on. They produce those in response to what they're sensing. But those chemicals whatever they are. I keep trying to call them pheromones, but pheromones are another example of this. They are a lower entropy product that's actually, disseminating into the environment, and they have a gradient that is actually informing the other plants as to what's going on. So it's still a matter of a form of transmission, either material or pure energy, if it's in the case of photons, that changes over time, and that change is a form of modulation. And so consequently, it informs whatever recipients are out there as to those changes. Is that?
Yep. Just
Well, that's the definition of biosemiosis, actually. It's that an organism reacts to a change that informs it. And if it's structurally configured to act on certain cues or certain signals or certain changes, well, then it will act. If it's not, that's what you were saying, George, it won't act upon it.
The receiver has to have the right receiving. It has to have the right recipients that through evolution have come to be acceptors of whatever that.
Yeah, and that's where that's this part of Maturana's theory that I'm interested in, because this is what he theorizes, is how certain organisms are responsive to how and why they are responsive to certain cues and not others. It's because they have co-evolved, and he described the process that makes this possible.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me to think in terms of complexity of organization, low entropy, high entropy systems, and to say I could have a rock sitting here on this table and I can talk at it all day and nothing will happen to it, but if I take a hammer to it, that'll change its organization. The moon is less well organized. It doesn't have as much, it's a higher entropy state than the Earth. So when things happen, when the sun shines down on it, not much happens on the moon. When the sun shines on the Earth, a lot happens. I don't know why I said that. But there's a degree of, it's not just about, I guess it's not, the distinction of messaging versus matter and energy is an interesting distinction. And the distinction, just like the distinction between matter and energy, the distinction between matter, energy, and information is an interesting distinction.
Gary's been hammering us on forces. So I wonder if you'd like to expand on that, Gary, because I frankly don't see a difference between the fact, the fundamental four forces of nature are the intermediaries, if you will, but how they're actually introduced to the system is, I think, where we get into the material energy world.
Yeah, so I'm using force more generally than simply those four forces. I'm talking about force in terms of, the hammer and the rock example. A force was being applied. Causing pain into an individual is essentially a force. You're forcing someone to change as a result of putting them into an uncomfortable situation. So
I think you're using force in the same way I'm using sign, actually,
yeah,
as a sign that has the capacity to trigger a response
yeah,
in form of a process. I mean, to set things in motion.
yes.
And it's exactly, I see it the way you use force is the same way I use the signal.
And the conveyance of the force can take a number of different forms. It could be material. You dropped off, George.
Well, Len just dropped out.
Yeah.
I was going to thank him and say goodbye, but he.
Maybe he's still. Oh, he's gone even. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of force as the instigator of change. That's the way I'm using it.
Well, that's the four forces. They can instigate change. And everything that happens in the material world is a conveyance of those.
Yeah, but being
well,
hit,
at least the electromagnetic.
Being hit by a rock, you're applying a force.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, something had to impart the force, the momentum in the rock in order for it to be effectual.
Is it useful to think of the light from the sun coming down onto a forest as being both energy and information or message?
I think
it's the same light.
I think it's information, it's mass, and it's energy. Yeah.
Well,
Because
getting back to my
go ahead, George.
Getting back to my insistence on differentiating between what is information and what is a contentless message, so to speak, and that was what the example of the trees versus the non-woody plant thing that I was trying to get at. It's the same light, but if you modulate it, then it's a change that if the plant is sensitive to that change, it is information. But if the plant is not sensitive to that change particularly, like the tree is not sensitive to the sun going across the sky.
Right.
Yeah, if you change the frequency of the light, then no information is conveyed.
Yeah, in the case of the tree, whereas in the case of the sunflower literally tracks the sun across the sky, hence its name. So it can be both. It can be neither or both, depending upon the receiver. What the receiver is programmed to pay attention to.
What about the fact that the photons coming down on the tree are supplying it with photosynthesis, right now, like in the moment, and versus you're using the term modulating. It's modulating the tree's growth patterns at a longer time scale. So now we have time scales. Being coming in where the information part of the light is not so much right now, because the tree is already there. Let's say the leaves are taking in CO2 and combining the carbon into compounds right now, versus the putting down growth directions. But so
I think I would interpret the photon as conveying information at the level of the chloroplast or even the chlorophyll molecule itself. It gets into a stable state, and then all of a sudden it's bombarded by a photon, and boom, we have to dissipate the protons, so to speak.
Yeah, and Helen, do time scales come in biosemiotics? Oh.
Don't plants in general try to grow in every direction, maybe exceptions like the sunflower. And if they get more light, they flourish in that direction. So there's no decision anything's making except maybe the chlorophyll molecule, which operates with more energy and produces more growth. So I say it's a very primitive message, if any.
were you answering the question to me, Tom, or?
No, just in general. The
No,
description.
because I didn't understand the question.
Well, the question involved time scale. So a living organism is alive, has to be alive right now, you know, doing metabolic processes. But then it can also, like say, change its behavior over
time.
time.
Well, from what I understand of biosemiotics, it's a moment-to-moment thing. It's I process a sign and I process a sign and I process another sign, and this is how I adapt or co-evolve with my environment, and then the kind of accumulation of this sets some evolutionary processes into motion, but there's no like meta semiosis that occurs at other scales. It really is the way the organism kind of processes. So the bacterium will, you know, get their flagella to spin in different directions because they process the level of sugar of the milieu in which they're evolving. The ants will find the food source moment to moment, and the slime mode also. And the bird will, which is not material here, but the birds will respond to, you know, the mating dance or the color of the feathers of the opposite gender or the sex. I don't know if what you say.
One way to go across time scales, Tyler, is the use of an integrator that accumulates some whatever's growing, and then at some point a sensor can detect a trigger level and generate a message that is going to be used by a system. So what it's doing is it's basically taking some real-time input, but accumulating it or averaging it over that time. And if that average gets high enough, it will send a message on to the next level of activity. So neurons, synapses are a really great example of
Yes.
the way they learn.
Is that part of your buffering? Are you?
Yeah.
That's a buffering and maybe with something else.
Yes, exactly.
So
Yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm done.
No, I'm saying, yes, indeed, that the cell is, or the bacterium is acting like this moment to moment, but the cell of the liver is going to operate like this, but the liver itself at its own scale, that's what you were saying, George, is going to operate and get the signals of what it is ingesting, and then the human being is going to react to other types of signals. So it does happen and occur at several levels, but with signs of different nature, right? So it's an integration of things. So I guess that's the combo or the onto or the whatever combination happens.
Whatever the hell that is.
Just string them all together. String them all together and make one word.
But we're talking about other types of signs and other types of organisms. And I'm not sure. That's a question that comes to my mind. I don't know what you think about that, George, but I don't think that is there a relationship between the way a more complex organism or the whole made of these different parts, is it related to the way the individual parts are reacting? I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't know. That's an interesting question.
I think
If-
more complex systems communicate more complexly,
Yeah,
so they can
but a
understand
cell
their.
behaves like a cell, and the liver behaves like a liver, and I mean, the fact that, well, I don't know. I'm putting the.
Well, this idea of an accumulator or using a buffer and then having that act to trigger something at over a longer time scale is extraordinarily common throughout biology, and can help to explain. You have to work out the details, but can help to explain why it is we have real-time activity at the molecular level is one thing, but then we have real-time activity at the metabolic level, and then we have real-time activity at the cellular level, and then real-time activity at the multicellular level, and so on. Well, how do you transcend those different time scales? It's by looking at things like, well, I said trigger, but there's also the averaging aspect.
But are they time scales or are they just scales?
No, they're well, both. The larger you get, the longer the time scale of activity, or another way of looking at it is time constants. The time constants get larger and larger as you go up. So you start at the picosecond level for atomic and work your way up to.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I mean, this is something that I haven't kind of looked into, the kind of integration of semiotic scales. What do you think, Tom, about that?
I'm sorry, was that a question?
Yes. I don't know. I mean, I didn't react to your comment on my paper, but you seem interested in semiosis and biosemiotics. So
Yes, I really did enjoy your paper. I was surprised
thank
by
you.
how much was in it. And I started reading it a couple of times and I didn't get very far. And then once I got past a certain point, I read the whole rest of it. I didn't enjoy it. And as I said, I know a little bit about patterns, and I've also been interested in biosemiotics. And I'm trying to remember a quotation which I can't quite remember. I'll send it out later from one of the big semiotics persons. But,
okay, yeah, no, I was just wondering of the integration of semiotic scales, which is something I should.
It sounds very interesting. It sounds like another aspect of complexity that for us to really master this stuff, somehow we have to learn to deal with.
Because Hofmeier has proposed steps into the evolution of consciousness in a certain way. So what he calls the semiotic competence.
Yes.
From the bacterium that goes just to do this thing to more, let's say, more complex cognitive capabilities.
Yes.
But there isn't this composition of smaller units into greater wholes, and the way like integrating scales like George has just alluded to right now.
Yes, and I think that's important, but I'm not quite sure how to deal with it. It's
but is part of what typically I'm supposed to look into. So it's an interesting thing.
Good. I'm glad somebody's going to solve it.
If anybody is interested in an example, I mentioned the synapse, and I spent many years modeling synaptic dynamics at multi-time scales and solving that problem using a leaky capacitor model. So I can send you all a link to a paper where I talk about it. There's a lot of neuroscience in it, so unless you're somewhat familiar with what goes on in both at the cellular level and the circuit level in neurons. I don't know if it would be interesting, but the point is, that's what solved the problem of how animals and we humans in particular are capable of having instantaneous experiences, internalizing those experiences, and then if they're reinforced over time, actually beginning to form memory traces of those experiences, that the relevancy of those experiences. So I'd be happy to send it. In fact, rather than mass mail it, why don't you send me an email and I'll respond with that link, because I don't want to. I'm getting flooded with stuff myself, so I don't want to do that to someone else. I did note here, Lynn and Gary are having a little back and forth over observe, orient, decide, and act. And Gary, sometimes you need to expand on what you mean. It depends on the perspective you take. So
Lynn was saying that the relational model was anthropomorphic, and I can understand why she says that, because when John talks about it, he talks about it in terms of the Aristotelian four causes, and
Yeah, and I've had constant backs and forths with Len and other people about the fact that it is anthropomorphic because it's been created in the context of human behavior, but it can apply to any.
Well, I think that's it. Using the words observe, orient, decide, and act, especially the word decide, requires some unpacking in order to make this applicable to atoms as well as molecules.
And I think that's probably where we need to go, because every single system goes through that cycle. And if we could find a way of communicating that by perhaps using, I don't know, signal. I don't know.
I'd be interested to know how a molecule or a non-living entity goes through, what the words can be or what the stages are.
Yeah.
This is what I'm interested in, because I see how it applies to any biological system, but I'm not sure how it applies. We already talked about it, Gary, but it's getting late, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we do need to sign off, but I think one of the things that we do need to try and do is we need to try and come up with a way of representing that model so that it does, it isn't anthropomorphic.
It goes through the whole chain of the unbroken sequence of
the big one.
But observe, orient, decide, act. You could reframe it in maybe George's what are they called? Fundamental.
Well, some kind of scale neutral terminology.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Because it's a way to observe. That's just not. Sorry, that doesn't work for me at all.
Well, so receive, rather than orient, I would say something like interpret, because a molecule does interpret when it's being interacting with other molecules.
Perceive.
I wouldn't say perceive, because that again is a human.
Yeah, but even interpret doesn't work. Yeah, interpret.
Well,
implies,
it doesn't. I can show you how it works at the molecular.
Oh, I know, but for me, interpret still implies an intelligence.
Well, let's find a non-anthropocentric term.
I think it might be sitting right in those things that you started with, George.
Well, let's put it the theme of the next.
Yeah, Tom, sort it out.
Could it be the
sort out the model.
Yes, it could be a theme, I think.
Of the next conversation.
We could put it in terms of the work processes and atomic processes that George outlined. I think it'd be not that difficult to do.
Okay. Who's going to have a go at stab at that then? Before next time?
I just see, because I know it well in my book. I used the term relations, I mean, it was trying to be very general. I wasn't trying to say perceive.
Right.
It's I was just, or George's, the term he likes to use, affordances, but those are so general. Sometimes they're not maybe so interesting, but at least it allowed me to think in my way consistently at each level. Because sometimes I think we have to be careful of saying orient, let's say, Gary, and we just say every system does this, but I then is the peer reviewer there want to see, okay, let's see what the examples are, and then I can agree or not.
I would say orient the process, it's like I kind of get something here, I receive it, I process it, and decide is like the direction it sends me to. I mean, but some can be collapsed. I mean, it would be interesting to.
That's why it's so important to have George's work processes and atomic processes and lens isomorphies, so that when you get words like this, you can shake them down. You've got a framework to shake them down with, and you get out of the anthropomorphic words, and you get into words that, you get into actual processes that can be defined. And yeah, you get down to energy versus matter and information, or messages. Oh my God, what a mess that is. However,
So the word decide is another problematic one, because decision implies that you've got a choice.
Exactly.
Or let's say the molecule has a choice. So if you've got a system or O2 and H2 molecules floating around and a little bit of spark here and there, there's only one decision. There's not even a decision. It's only one choice.
Wow.
No, but even in the anthropomorphic application, if you look at John Boyd's first application, that was, how does the jet fighter, react in the F-16 with the MiG behind and the mountain in front and blah, blah. I don't think there's a decision. There's a kind of a, it's not an actual decision. It's a selected path, which can be automatically selected, because it's okay,
reacting to a force.
Right.
And Hidalgo
exactly.
makes the distinction between knowledge and know-how.
Yeah.
And anything can have knowledge, and George will say knowledge is structure and organization.
Yeah.
And so you go, okay, what is the know-how? And know-how isn't conscious. It's not like human know-how. It's what a system
but
does.
Even human know-how isn't conscious. That's
right.
It's
exactly.
It's like the difference of Christopher Alexander saying that, you have unself-conscious patterns, and then you have conscious patterns. So anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, Gary, you got to think about how this is going to be made general.
I think we all have to.
Yeah.
I already did.
It's in the book.
It's in the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thanks
Bye-bye.
a lot. See you next time.
Next
I'll send out. Yeah, it's at the beginning of next month. Yeah. So
okay, cool.
I'll send around the recording later. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks.
Terrific.
Bye.
Okay.
See ya.
Thanks all.
Bye. Thanks, George.
Oops.
Yeah.